Hey guys, I'm back. And today I thought I would do like an introduction slash discussion of Thomas Paine's Common Sense. I've collected here in this nice Library of America volume. Very high quality, highly recommended. Yeah, it collects Common Sense, The Age of Reason, as well as The Rights of Man, his three major works, as well as some of his more, newspaper contributions, as well as letters. The American Crisis is the main one. And then, like I said, yeah, some of his letters. But that's besides the point. So, getting into it, Common Sense by Thomas Paine. You know what's interesting about Thomas Paine is that he was kind of a late bloomer. You see, he lived the first half of his life in kind of total obscurity, really. He was born in Britain. Yeah, he was British, which is a funny enough fact, kind of, a little bit ironic. Yeah, and he kind of bounced around doing some not particularly extravagant career professions. He was a corset maker for a while, like his father. He was basically a tax collector and a teacher, despite not having the most robust education. But nevertheless, in his late 30s, he came to America in 1774, November, I believe, just a couple of months before the shots fired at Lexington and Concord. And it seems that those shots heard around the world had a profound impact on Paine. And not long after, he began writing Common Sense, a famous pamphlet. It came out in early 1776, before the Declaration of Independence, I think January. A viral sensation, bestseller. It's estimated that it sold between 100,000 to 120,000 copies in the first 3 months, and estimated up to 500,000 by the end of the Revolution, which is crazy. So by the end of the Revolution, it would have been translated, into German and French and stuff like that. But just so you get a sense of scale, the population of what became the United States was around 2.5 million at that time. So that's a crazy proportion. Everybody knew this work. It was read aloud in taverns. It was a major deal. Why it got to be such a hit is, I guess it's a little bit, maybe right time, right place. That takes a lot of the agency away from Paine. He also deliberately wrote it for the common man. And to that end, it has rather lucid prose, and it's pretty straightforward. He's not, he was not a political theorist. Paine wasn't. So this is not like a super dense text. It's only 45 pages. But its impact was massive. Everyone knew it. I guess getting into the work, it's split into 4 sections. And there's an appendix at the end, which was added in later editions. He published it anonymously. It didn't take long before people connected the dots and figured out it was him. But it was initially anonymous. And he was ready to give away all the proceeds from the work. I don't think it ended up working. I don't think it generated much revenue for some reason, but kind of noble, I guess. He was willing to donate it all, even though it could have potentially have made him rich. And Thomas Paine's an interesting guy, I guess. Definitely a colorful figure. I'll save a lot of the biographical details in case if I cover one of his other works, like The Age of Reason or something at some point. Because, he got caught up in the French Revolution, and he kind of had an odd ending. Dramatic ending. But we'll save that for some other time, I guess. Anyway, so Common Sense, like I said, split into 4 sections. I guess I can do a brief introduction or something about what goes on here. Kind of light commentary, I suppose. So the first section kind of opens with his kind of Enlightenment theories of man, I guess. Basically, his contention is that society kind of is a natural natural endpoint of, I don't know, like society and communities are kind of like a natural, they kind of naturally generate from any collection of individuals, where the sense of fraternity and unity, that's just kind of like mankind's natural inclination out of the goodness of his heart to sort of form those bonds and stuff like that. However, he distinguishes society from the government, whereas society is natural, from the naturally good parts of mankind. He posits that government is kind of the opposite. Government is born out of wickedness in human nature. That is to say that because societies get too big to manage and too unruly, and the bonds weaken, there's kind of people get naughty, and for that reason, the government is there out of necessity to, I guess, act as an umpire for humanity's worst excesses. So society is born out of humanity's goodness, and government born out of humanity's wickedness is his main point. Anyway, so that's kind of the most theoretical or abstract that this pamphlet here gets. But nevertheless, then he sort of transitions to talking about monarchy, specifically how it's an unnatural state of affairs. That is to say that naturally all are kind of equal. Every member of mankind is kind of equal, and that there's no universal law or something like that, or constraint that makes one party or family naturally entitled to rule and the rest of mankind to be subjects. Yeah, which kind of takes us, well, I don't know how in depth I want to get here, or share my own opinions, I guess. I guess he does kind of talk about, he does some light ribbings on the monarchy in the first section, even some of the, I guess you would say, more Republican monarchies. That was the case in Great Britain at the time, that it's always corruptive, even if you have a king that isn't absolute anymore. Yeah, he kind of takes like a pot shot at checks and balances, even with a king, arguing that, well, he thinks there's a contradiction. That is to say, if you have a House of Commons that can check some of the powers of a king, and a king that can check some powers of a House of Commons, that's contradictory, because in his argumentation line, that you're acknowledging that one is wiser in some respects and not in others, and it's kind of a contradiction to him, which it doesn't make that much sense to my opinion. But and the second part of that, which is kind of true, but I'm not going to go too in depth. Yeah, I'm not going to follow that line through the end, is that in an arrangement like that, power is kind of, it can never be perfectly balanced. And inevitably, through time, one side of the scale or one branch of government is going to probably consolidate power. And yeah, which I think is likely true, but I'll just leave it at that. Anyway, so moving on to section 2. It opens with kind of, the main point of section 2 really is to kind of make first a biblical and then a historical argument against the concept of monarchy, particularly hereditary monarchy. He opens with citing lots of passages from the Bible, kind of that prove, I guess, that the God does not ordain the monarchical forms of government in any sense. I'm not going to comment much on that. I don't know much about the citations of his Bible or the accuracy therein. But I guess in the more potent or relevant part of the section 2, he talks about just how ridiculous hereditary monarchy is. It's kind of funny, actually. It's probably the funniest section. I mean, he's kind of sarcastic a little bit. Um, yeah. So after having established that there's no biblical basis for monarchy, he he says even if people elect like a king, they make someone a king because he's a really great leader. There's absolutely no reason why anyone should assume that his progeny, his posterity, his sons and their sons in an infinite line are fit to rule. It doesn't make any sense. Um, yeah. He says that others argue that there's a sense of stability that comes with a monarchy, a hereditary monarchy. But Paine, remember, he's an Englishman. He cites things like the Wars of the Roses, succession, crises that can last decades and costs, thousands of lives. Uh, so it hasn't always historically been the case that, well, if you have a hereditary monarchy, that things are going to go smoothly. Um, but then he kind of, I mean, he just kind of riffs on the whole concept some more. He's like, even so, he says the origin of monarchies, like the first monarch in a line has always kind of been murky as well. It's kind of funny. He calls William the Conqueror that French bastard. Highly irregular for the time to say something like that. Funny, but kind of irregular. Uh, yeah. He says, yeah, the initial line of a king is usually like some ruffian or something. Not the most auspicious of origins for most monarchies in the first place. Um, yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. Hereditary monarchies, that is. It's just kind of inherently a little bit silly. Um, yeah, I don't know if I'm forgetting anything major from section 2. I guess we can move on to section 3. I might circle back if I remember something that's super critical, I guess. And then section 3 is also pretty important. He basically he makes two arguments. One, that a separation between, I guess, United States and Great Britain, number one, was almost certainly inevitable. And number two, that regardless of that, due to the injuries and insults propagated by the British to the Americans, the crisis, the revolution, the independence, it's necessary, and there can be no reconciliation anymore, like today or now when he was writing this. Yeah, I mean, he argues that, well, obviously Great Britain is thousands of miles away across an ocean away from the United States, and it's incredibly impractical for them to, send communications and laws across the seas for several months to get here. And if we want any grievances redressed, they have to sail months back to Great Britain, and then they have to deliberate and then send back and forth. It's just a really impractical situation. But further, he argues that, well, Great Britain has never really considered us as a part of them. That is to say, that Great Britain pursues its interests, and if that happens to benefit America, it's incidental. They never really were doing the laws. I don't know. I mean, it makes sense, I guess. America was never treated, or the colonies were never treated like they were Great Britain proper. So their priorities in the Americas were never given the same weight. Yeah. I don't know where I was going with this. Yeah. Others argue he tries to, address some counter arguments that, Great Britain gives us security and commerce and stuff like that. But Paine says that not so, because and only because of our, I guess, attachment to Great Britain are we enemies with nations such as Spain and France. But they bring us into, these intractable European conflagrations and stuff like that. And So truly, Paine thinks that if we were by ourselves, we'd be much more peaceful, and we could engage in, sophisticated commerce with other nations and be friendly and be peaceful. And yeah, that Great Britain is actually kind of holding us back in some sense. Sorry, I'm speaking in present tense, but obviously you know what I'm talking about, from 1776. Right. I guess I should give a little bit more context as well. Like I said, this was before the Declaration of Independence, a couple months before, I guess 6 months before. Yeah. Despite, the shots fired in 1775, declaring independence was not obvious or immediate for much of the country or much of the continental congresses. They tried. Large elements of these bodies tried very hard for reconciliation, but after it became clear that the government of Great Britain, or King George, I guess, if you want to blame him, were just kind of spitting on any attempts for an olive branch. Yeah, they really had to be shown that Great Britain was not willing to play. Yeah, so Paine was kind of an early advocate for complete independence, and in that sense, he was a little bit radical in that regard. Yeah. So he was really trying to convince the people that, well, the unthinkable, that it was possible and beneficial to declare independence. I mean, they lived their whole lives in a status quo of being, subjects to the king. So any change like that would seem, I don't know, crazy, I guess. But nevertheless, yeah, going into his argument that the time is now for revolution, or independence, I should say. Yeah, due to the insults, due to the tragedies, the massacres, the financial constrictions done to cities like Boston, the quartering of troops among the American countrymen. These are all grievance errors, and the willingness by some to turn a blind eye to them seems to have offended Paine, but he goes kind of light on them. Yeah, I mean, people were dying, and Great Britain kind of looked at us with contempt, not as equals. And Paine argues that if we were to do reconciliation, this would just allow Great Britain to, be more subtle in reestablishing control, so this doesn't happen again. They wouldn't use this as an opportunity to become closer or listen to us. No. And he kind of touches upon this. He develops this argument a little bit further in the fourth section. I don't know if I should say this, but not. If I was going to be a hater, I would say that the only criticism I guess I would have for Common Sense here is that I'm not sure the organization of the pamphlet is a little bit, I guess I would say, unintuitive for me. Yeah. Regardless. Yeah. And time for revolution is now. Is there anything else I need to say or should say? Oh yeah, I almost forgot. It's probably the weakest part of this thing as well, I guess. It's bold, only because, it's bold, and to that end, it's admirable. But he doesn't quite pull it off. But he's like, the only reason not to be so hardy for independence is that you're worried that there's nothing to replace it. So he proposes his own schema of government, and it's kind of like circuitous and kind of silly a little bit. His proposed forms of government, like I said, he was not a political theorist, and other founding fathers who are actually more inclined to that study. Kind of made fun of him a little bit, such as John Adams, but yeah, his plan for government was kind of complicated. Odd, a little creative, I guess, but it kind of counters something he was saying in the first section as well. He's like, the best form of government would be simple. I guess I neglected to mention that. He's like, because, yeah, the government is a necessary evil, it should be concerned solely with getting the lowest cost and the greatest benefit. And Paine argued that that would be a relatively simple form of government. Anyway, so back to section 3. So then he proposes his own plan, and it's kind of complicated. He would have like the colonies like all propose like a presidential candidate, and it would be by lot who would get theirs picked first, and then they would cycle through all of them, all of the colonies' picks for president, as well as there would be some sort of like, he, like I said, very British. He wanted to like set up like a Magna Carta for America. I think he called it a constitutional charter. It was kind of like a I don't know what you would even call this. So he basically wanted a Congress, and he was going to be like, there's the people, there's the Congress, and then there'd be like some sort of like body like between them. I guess that would be, I don't know. It's a little bit strange. Yeah. I mean, he also lays out some basic forms of republicanism. He's like, obviously, there's going to be districts, and that will send representatives and stuff like that, which did happen, I guess. But yeah. And it would be nice for them to be routinely elected in some sense, so they're held accountable, and so they can be more in touch with their constituency. Something also that a king is unable to do. He doesn't really have to check in with his subjects because he's not accountable to them. Even more so with hereditary monarchies, because they basically become like an isolated clan in a castle somewhere, so they don't really know what's going on. But yeah, I think we're ready to go into section 4, the final section. Yeah, he begins. He kind of moves to more practical concerns. He's like, all right, so now that I hopefully convinced you that independence is the way to go, I endeavored to prove to you that we have the means to secure it. And so he talks about like Britain's navy and stuff like that, and he has all this like facts and figures about it. He's like, I know we don't really have a navy, but he's like, don't worry, guys. Great Britain's navy, though it rules the seas, is like all across the world, so we don't actually need a navy comparable to theirs to adequately defend our shores, especially because they have to come all the way from Europe, sail all the way across the sea to get to us. So he's like, we don't actually need that large of a navy to, stand our ground. Yeah. What else does he say? I guess he's also talking about how, like, this is what I mean. He kind of keeps developing some of the stuff he said in section 3. And it's like, we have to declare independence now, otherwise we can't secure any aid, military or financial, from other nations, because they can't recognize us as a legitimate entity if we don't recognize ourselves as a separate entity from Great Britain. So he's like, if we want their assistance, we need to declare independence. Yeah, otherwise they can't recognize us or see us. He also makes kind of an interesting point. He's like, another reason why the time for independence is for now is that he's like, our nation's pretty much at the perfect size. That is to say, it was relatively small, so we still had, decently strong ties, and were unified. Than would be the case if we were much larger. So you could all be of the same mind together, less fractured, to wage this war. And also that we're a young nation. Or I guess we weren't a nation. We were young, I don't know, colonies. We're a young entity, I guess. And he says, yeah, he's like, he makes this argument. He's like, in most nations' history, or almost all of them, I guess, their boldest moments were their early years. That was when they were the most bold. He's like, when you're young like us, you don't have a lot to lose. So you do all these crazy and momentous and historical things, I guess. Then he's like, well, that's us. And the moment is now. Yeah. Hopefully I'm not forgetting anything major. I'm just, obviously this is off the top of my head. I read it yesterday, but no script today. So yeah. And then the appendix, which I guess you could call like a fifth section, like I said, added to later editions in the wake of a king's, condescending speech or whatever. He just kind of addresses some light, I guess, criticisms that he got. Like he attacks like Quakers. He's like, the Quakers who are against us for trying to do independence, they should be as against us as they are against British intransigence and violence and stuff like that. Yeah, and he kind of just like reiterates the stuff he said in other sections. But all in all, yeah, I mean, it's a pretty interesting text, I guess. It's not widely read today, despite its renown in its own day. Now, like I said, I won't spoil Thomas Paine's the rest of his biography, but yeah, I mean, he kind of fell out of favor by the end of his own life. But yeah, I mean, that pretty much does it. I don't know. This was kind of like a weird radio rant, I guess, but it's good to be back. Okay. Um, I don't know. Should you read it? I mean, it's hard to say no because it's like so short. Like I said, like 45 pages. It's like, I guess if you have any interest in this time period, I guess there's like no reason not to. Um, it's very readable. It was meant to be. I mean, but obviously it was written in the 18th century. So I guess if you're not intimately familiar with that style of writing, I guess maybe it might be a little bit jarring, but um, it's really not that bad. It's pretty fine, I guess. Um, yeah, maybe I'll cover his other stuff at some point. I don't know about the Age of Reason. Excuse me. Maybe I'll do that one, and maybe not the Rights of Man, or maybe I'll do all of them. I don't know. They're like 5 times larger than the Common Sense one is, but pardon me. I suppose that pretty much about does it. Yeah. Make sure to like and subscribe. All right. All right. Yeah. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a good one.